Hello, thank you for joining us once again in a devotional thought that encourages us to make God our center. One of the most difficult things that we do at the food room every week in serving all the families that come through is actually not the serving part, but in fact, it is trying to find a place to put the food to serve the others, especially when there is a truck that comes 3 weeks away and we have to order that extra food. So, what we do is we stack the food to the ceiling, we condense as much as we can. In some cases, we actually have to stack food in front of other food. Now, this is a problem because it makes it difficult to get to the food that's back behind it. So, what is the spiritual application? Let's look at this verse together. It's Exodus chapter 20, verses 3 through 5. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. You know, as you read through the Old Testament, especially Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, you see the Israelites failing in these first two commandments. The commandments to serve only God, to love only God. They followed Baal, the Ashtoreth poles, the gods of the Egyptians. And they did several vile pagan practices and used those practices in their worship. As a result, God turned away, for they had moved away from Him. They had moved God from His rightful place in their life. What they had done is they had covered God up with these other false gods. As you're reading these accounts, it is obvious to see where they failed in their worship. But what about us? What happens with us? Sometimes it's harder to see, and sometimes we just don't want to see when we fail in our worship, when we put other things in front of God. So what do we need to do? Number one, I think we need to take an honest look at ourselves. We need to see if there's any place that we have moved God out of His rightful place in our lives. Is there something else that is covering God up? In the busyness of our lives, it is really easy to do that. But keep in mind, it doesn't have to be just physical things like money or sports or so many other things that we tend to look at and pick on. It can also be areas of our lives that are an emotional pit that covers God up. Sometimes we can allow fear or worry or anxiety or anger or jealousy, blaming others, or even pride to so overwhelm us that we forget that God is bigger than anything Satan can throw at us. The second thing I think we need to do is recognize the power in these words in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 28 and 29. Let me read those to you. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for God is a consuming fire. We need to look forward to our goal, which is heaven. If there is anything that pushes that goal aside, we better stop and reprioritize, because heaven should not be shaken in our life. While the kingdom of heaven cannot be shaken, I think there's times that we can forget to make that goal our priority. We need to have our goal of heaven in mind all the time. The second thing that this verse reveals to us is that we need to be thankful. We need to be thankful to the God who has given us grace and who has given us mercy. We need to be thankful to the God who, every time the Israelites fell away and turned their back on him, when they realized what they had done and cried out for God's help, God in each and every case came to their aid. God does not desert us, and we need to be thankful to have a God that does not desert us. As we look at that verse, we need to recognize that God is so big that we need to be in awe of him. We need to serve him with reverence in our lives. And what that does is when we are in awe of God and when we serve him with reverence, he is in his rightful place. Finally, we need to recognize the power of God. In the words of the Hebrew writer, he is a consuming fire. And those are very powerful words. What a mental image, the image of a God who is a consuming fire. You know, often we think of fire in its negative consequences. It's a destroyer. What happens when we allow God to completely consume us? What happens is this consuming fire that God is, he does destroy the sin that is in our life. He destroys the other gods that we have placed before him. But then he rebuilds us. He rebuilds us with his hope. He rebuilds us with his peace. He rebuilds us with our hope of heaven. And he rebuilds us with thankfulness to a God who is all-consuming in our lives. And when we allow him to do that in our lives, he is in his rightful place. Thank you for taking 6 minutes to center with me today.